Hello everyone and welcome back to Backlot Banter. My name is Tucker Hazel and today I am joined by my little Christmas present, Tanner Dykstra. Today we're here to talk about a Christmas movie, A Complete Unknown, starring Timothee Chalamet, about the life and times of Mr. Bob Dylan. And we're here to give you our thoughts on this movie, but of course if you have seen A Complete Unknown and want to talk to us about it or any of the movies releasing henceforth and forthwith, Tanner, you can join our Discord server and leave comments letting us know your thoughts on this movie in the comments box below. Tanner, we've seen A Complete Unknown from Mr. James Mangold.
That's right.
He's on a hot streak.
That's
2 years in a row.
He's got a hot hand.
Yeah. How do you feel about A Complete Unknown?
Tucker, I like A Complete Unknown. I think it's a quite a good, very good movie. I have some apprehensions about it, specifically as it pertains to being a music biopic. But I think generally it finds its way out of a lot of the trappings and pitfalls of that genre. I think broadly, my biggest thumbs up about it is everyone in the cast is very good.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Especially Timothee Chalamet, who doesn't feel like he's doing a cheap imitation, like I feel a lot of performers in these music biopics do.
Sure.
Like they're so focused on getting like the intonation of the voice and everything right that they forget to put some chips into the actual like performance.
Yeah.
But yeah, everyone is really good. I think it's paced actually very well, and tackles the character of Bob Dylan in the film in a fascinating way that other music biopics don't. But we'll get into all that once I hear Tucker what you thought of the movie.
Yeah. I was really pleasantly surprised by this movie. I've seen a lot of music biopics, and I've liked basically all of them. I can't think there's any one that I was like, that was a bad movie.
Oh, sure,
but
sure.
I usually don't really resonate with them in any particular way, but I think that this really eschews quite a bit of the stereotypes of the music biopic. I think it has a unique sense of pace. As you were mentioning, I think it covers some very interesting themes, and in a way, it actually feels a lot more like an ensemble film than your traditional music biopic. Like we were watching Bohemian Rhapsody in 2018, and like Queen is a band, it's a group, but it's like only about Freddie Mercury.
Yeah.
But whereas this movie, which is about one musician, I mean, I guess he has some like backup, like larger band as the movie progresses. But this is really about Bob Dylan. But I was surprised to see how well balanced the cast is in terms of screen time, in terms of influence on the plot and like character motivation and stuff. And there's a couple of themes that I want to get into that I think give this movie a lot more thematic importance and ideas than most music biopics go into. So I just think it's totally unique, and I really fell into the movie's rhythm, and I was like, I was just sitting there, I'm like, man, this is very different for this genre.
Yeah. So let's start with Mr. Timothee Chalamet, who I will say is very invested in the role. Like I think I've been listening to or been hearing some behind the scenes things where this movie was delayed in its production. Like this was supposed to come out or start filming rather in like 2020, and so
really?
Yes. And because of that, Timothee Chalamet, through those years, was like perfecting the performance style of Bob Dylan, his musical talents. You know, he learned to play guitar from not knowing anything for this movie,
Cool.
And then has had 4 years of practice, 3-4 years of practice doing this stuff. And it all sort of feeds into this performance that feels a lot more honest and committed than we usually get. Yeah. Because a lot of our other...
You don't usually get that kind of prep time for any movie.
Exactly. That's what can make a lot of these performances feel like SNL impressions or something like that. Bob Dylan does not feel like that.
For SNL, they don't usually get 4 years to
they get less time. They get even less time than that. But Timothee Chalamet as Bob Dylan, I think he has a lot more time to fall into the rhythm of this very eccentric character. Perhaps one of the more eccentric and mysterious figures that have ever been put to screen in a music back. Yeah, thank you. He's almost like Tucker, something that you don't know a lot about, like some sort of unknowable figure potentially.
Let's talk about that as the first major theme that I think this movie touches upon, and they pretty explicitly state it in the sequence in which Bob and Sylvie are kind of having an argument about the fact that Bob doesn't share a lot about his past with Sylvie, and he comes up with this retort that I think kind of pervades the rest of the movie, and why I see this as one of the main thematic points in the movie, that someone being famous is more about the story that is told about them, and the story that is made up about them, and the way that the public sort of accepts certain things about their life, and that becomes what we know that famous person to be. And in this movie, A Complete Unknown, which is about Bob Dylan, we don't learn a lot about Bob Dylan.
Exactly.
And that is interesting, and it feels to me very intentional. I think I was talking about this movie with my family, who I saw it with afterward, and they were like, I didn't really understand his motivations, and obviously you don't learn anything about his backstory before the moments that we like see him show up outside of like fleeting things. But I think that's obviously very intentional, and I think it leads to this movie having a unique tone, because it becomes more about the legend, the icon of Bob Dylan, and not about the person, and not about like his personal machinations, because even in the movie, when you're supposed to be like getting into the mindset of Bob Dylan, you can't, because the movie doesn't give you an opportunity to sit with him in long sequences. You don't get to learn about his like freaking Elvis Odin story, where he like learns music. He loves music for the first time.
It's not like a cradle to grave thing.
No,
you don't. It is set explicitly from the years 1961 to 1965, when Bob Dylan came to New York, like rose to stardom, and made the jump from being a folk singer in the sort of lineage of Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie, to falling more in line with the rock and roll stylings of the time, personified kind of in like Johnny Cash. But also about how Bob Dylan blurred the lines between these two genres, and how the pull from either camp, the pull from either genre, sort of alienated him from both, and how he wanted to do his own thing, forge his own path, be his own artist, make the music that he wanted to make, and how he resented, sort of being a mouthpiece, a guy a shining guy on the hill for either genre. He wanted to be singular in his work.
Yeah, and thank you, Tanner.
Yes,
we're going back and forth so simply here, because that is theme number 2. Ding ding ding, you got it. Theme number 2 is Bob Dylan as an artist not wanting to be put into a box, and not wanting to fit into any specific genre or do the thing that people expect him to do. He's very resistant against the idea that he has become famous, he needs to fall into a certain rhythm and like accept this is the style, this is what people want. He rejects all of that. And that is, again, another intentional major theme of this film that I think also works back into the pacing and into the storytelling here, where this is a non-traditional music biopic. We talked about it, that it's not cradle to grave. We don't see his childhood. We don't see past 1965. Like, this is a narrow time set, but it also, in terms of pacing and storytelling, rejects a lot of the traditional music biopic elements, even in the time frame that it covers, because we don't see him, like, for the most part, like, oh, this is the moment where he came up with that song that we love, or like, or honestly, other than the fact that we know, kind of through marketing or the storytelling of this, that it's going to lead to the point where he plays electric in front of everyone for the first time. There's not like that we're building up to that one iconic performance that he had, or like, there's no, for me, it felt like, the movie pacing wise felt very laid back. It was skipping over some things that otherwise would have felt like this is integral to the story. It was just kind of flowing from scene to scene. There's a lot of time jumps that are kind of here or there. We don't even see his first album come out. We don't see him go on tour almost at all. Like, this is rejecting a lot of the things that you expect to see, like the beats you expect it to hit. And that, again, feels intentional and makes it feel like a non-traditional music biopic. And it's part of the reason why I think the movie surprised me so much, and why I ended up enjoying it, is because it found its own rhythm. And I think that in that, it also tied back into those themes very well, and seeing what seemed to be like sort of the mindset of Bob Dylan. This movie, tonally and pacing-wise, matches those two core themes that I was mentioning in its filmmaking and its pacing. I'm like, that's a really bold statement for a genre that's usually very rote. I felt like that really works well.
Yeah. So I want to sort of maybe peel back the curtain a little bit, give a little context to our to us coming into this.
Sure.
We are two young gentlemen We are two gentlemen. Yeah, that's true.
I have facial hair. I can't be that young.
Yeah, that's right. We could be, 40, 50. Who's to say?
Who's to say?
We're two young gentlemen who, I'll venture to say for both of us, don't have a lot of attachment or knowledge about Bob Dylan in the first place. This is quite different from watching films like, I don't know, Bohemian Rhapsody has brought up a couple of times. It's sort of like the big music biopic that everyone remembers now because it made a fucking $1 billion or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's about one of the most famous bands in the world, one of the most famous figures in the world. And so everyone had a lot of baggage.
It's not like a piece by piece kind of thing. Or
no.
Like,
It's not. But so from that standpoint, I wasn't like, oh, when Bob Dylan starts writing a song, I was like, oh, this is his famous song X or whatever. Or when he performs at one of the Norfolk music festivals, I'm like, oh, this is the iconic performance where he does Y. And when he goes electric, I know Bob Dylan going electric as like a vague thing that happened that is like famous about him.
Yeah.
But I don't know when it happened. I don't know, the backstory of why it happened. I don't know the arguments that went into it. Like we might have for other famous musicians, we sort of know these storied legends of things that happened in their lifetimes that are then put to screen. That can feel a little rote once we see them. It's like, obviously you have to put this in there. So I think that brings a lot of freshness to our perspective on a complete unknown. I just found that interesting that I was learning a lot of these things about Bob Dylan for the first time, and it didn't feel preachy or like Wikipedia article-y to me at all. I think a lot of it lends itself to that pacing and the compelling relationships that Bob has with characters like Pete Seeger, for example, but also the two women in his life that I think also kind of represent the two genres, them being Joan Baez and Sylvie, who are characters that I like and I think are compelling and well acted and everything by the two women, Monica Barbaro and Elle Fanning. I do feel like they sort of hit a wall and are left out of the narrative going into the kind of third act, which is a ding that I have for the movie.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I think, as I mentioned earlier, this movie does to me feel like more of an ensemble piece. That I think the phrase you used that I will continue forward and drill in on here is the impact on relationships that Bob Dylan's personality and drive to not be put in a box and hesitancy to share himself more personally with the people in his life. These are the things that color the dynamic that he has with everyone in his life. And to that point, I think the film does mostly a very good job at showing the frustration that Pete or Joan or Sylvie have, because those are kind of like our four main players.
The big three,
those the big three plus Bob. That the frustrations that they have in having him in his life, having him in their life, and not knowing what he's going to do next, not knowing where he comes from, and like he is a very like unexpected person who like he flies by the seat of his pants, doesn't really care what other people think, and why that ends up being emotionally impactful is because I think from the three of their perspective, and from the audience perspective, you understand Pete, you understand Joan, you understand Sylvie, you understand why they're frustrated. Their minds work in a little bit more understandable ways than Bob does, and so in these sequences, you're like, okay, I can get he's charismatic. He's like he has this energy to him that I can understand. He feels very genuine. I can understand why these people would gravitate towards him. But as their relationship starts to build and the years start to pass, and he starts to like push them away or just like tell them no on a bunch of things, and they're
he's
like,
moving
dude,
in a direction. He's moving in a direction that none of the rest of them are. And that's what frustrates them and alienates them. And from a interpersonal perspective, they're all like, this guy's a fucking asshole. And
you're kind of an asshole, Bob.
You're kind of an asshole, Bob. And I think that's also kind of a thesis of the movie is that like you're not supposed to like Bob Dylan as a person. And I think that's he lacked a lot of interiority for obvious reasons because that's kind of who Bob Dylan represents. He's always changing, always reinventing himself, which is I will mention very, very like artfully rendered in a film that I watched a couple weeks ago. Todd Haynes' "I'm Not There," which is a which is a film about Bob Dylan that never says the name Bob Dylan,
Sure.
And has 6 different actors portraying like 6 different personas of Bob, really drilling down into that theme of like. He was always a different person. He had many, he contained multitudes and always reinvented himself in different periods of time, which is very artfully done in that film. And then this one is sort of more straight down the line with James Mangold's approach, which is just that, like, I'm just kind of like delivering a standard kind of movie to you, but the way that I'm going to convey that Bob Dylan is an enigmatic figure is by focusing more on his impact, his relationship with others around him, not giving you that background on Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
Only like he's a kid from Minnesota. His name's Robert Zimmerman, and that's kind of it.
Yeah.
That's all. That's all the background you get on him.
Yeah.
And yeah, and he loves Woody Guthrie. That was like the reason he came in.
Sure.
And we keep going back to Woody Guthrie. Let me look real quick. Yeah, Scoot McNairy.
Yeah.
Plays Woody Guthrie, who is sort of afflicted with this degenerative illness and is in a hospital.
Yeah.
And that's like where you get Bob Dylan's first performance. He plays a song of his called "Song for Woody," and there is a lot of performances of Bob Dylan songs in this movie. Yeah. Bob Dylan has a very deep discography, and we really dive into it in this film.
Yeah.
Again, songs that I'm not necessarily familiar with. I know, like, Times They Are A-Changing and everything like that. I know Complete Unknown, etc., etc.
I know a couple songs from the trailer for this movie.
Exactly. And they're well deployed. I think they feel a little less ham-fisted than I would feel normally, but like Times They Are Changing comes after the Cuban Missile Crisis scene.
No, there's definitely some moments where it's like, lyrics are matching what is on screen thematically. Yes. This ties together, but I don't think that is. I wouldn't use that as a knock. I can certainly use it as a knock in some other movies where it feels a little more ham-fisted. But I think specifically the reason why the integration of the songs works so much here. Number one, I think we, admittedly, because we are not super familiar with these songs, it isn't until I hear a specific lyric where I'm like, oh, this is attached to the themes of this scene. I'm not like, oh, there's the first few chords of like that song. God damn it!
Sure.
Playing it in this moment.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
But to my credit, I guess, that helped me enjoy the movie a little bit more. But I also think that they do a really good job at tying the songs into the greater pacing and tone of the film by playing just chord progressions from the songs largely, or this happens quite frequently, before the like lyrics come in. There will just be under the scene, there will just be kind of ambient Bob Dylan chord progression guitar playing or piano playing, and then the song will sort of come in. And so I think it feels very integrated. It feels very stitched together. Sometimes the songs will flow from scene to scene, regardless of what is actually being shown on screen. And I felt that really contributed to the unique pace and tone of the movie, especially because a lot of these chord progressions, a lot of these beats for Bob Dylan songs are very slow. They're very plodding. They're very lackadaisical. They're very laid back. And the film sort of takes that approach by just slowly flowing from sequence to sequence and kind of going with the wind, just sort of back and forth from time period to time period. And the music, I think, matches that really well. So again, I think a really interesting feat of editing and sound design to match the pace and tone of the film with the music and tie the music underneath the scenes and then fade in when the lyrics are coming in. I'm like, it just feels very tastefully done, I usually don't notice these things when I'm watching a music biopic, because I'm usually more focused on the performances. But I think they stitch together everything in a really interesting way.
No, yeah, I mean, James Mangold is quickly becoming one of the more reliable like journeyman directors in Hollywood, where he's just like, you hand him a movie, he's gonna give you something well done. Like, you know, there's examples like last year's Dial of Destiny, which we didn't particularly care for. but was not like poorly directed.
No,
I would
it's just
say.
not a Steven Spielberg movie.
Correct. James Mangold is not Steven Spielberg, if you can believe it.
Yes.
But no, like he is, he is a very adept technical hand and can deliver you a good film, and is very well versed in making historical period pieces or biopics. He made Walk the Line and got Reese Witherspoon an Oscar win and Joaquin Phoenix an Oscar nomination. He made Ford v Ferrari, which got nominated for Best Picture, and he's looking to kind of maybe repeat that here.
I absolutely think so.
Get a couple Oscar noms under his belt again for A Complete Unknown. Potentially make Timothee Chalamet the youngest Best Actor winner ever.
We will see. Yeah, that'd be really interesting.
I
will say one thing though about Timothee Chalamet's performance. I want to talk about some text as well.
Sure.
This is a testament to Timothee Chalamet's commitment and the direction of the performance as Bob Dylan. He does the voice, I assume, very well. As far as I know, my brother was saying it's a very accurate voice. Sometimes no fucking clue what this guy's saying. Absolutely no clue. I mean, there are just sequences where he's mumbling into his chest or into his like guitar handle, neck. I don't know what it's called. And I'm like, dog could be saying anything.
It's also a case of Bob Dylan. They really sort of harp on like he talks the way that he writes as well, which is very very poetic, very esoteric. It can be veiled and enigmatic in the way that he writes songs, and they're just like he talks that way too. Which I think is accurate to people who knew Bob Dylan, who know Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan's not dead. Also, he also took a pass on the script. I learned, and made notes on it and everything like that.
Yeah.
And apparently, the last thing he said to James Mangold before, when he signed off on the script was, "Go with God." Which is very very Bob Dylan-y in that way. Sure. Something that you believe that he would say as displayed by Chalamet's performance here, because again, it feels not like a cheap impression, an SNL impression. I keep going back to SNL. I should say Brian Taylor Johnson or Brian Austin Johnson, I'm not really sure, who is a guy on SNL who does a Bob Dylan impression. He's also the guy that does their current Trump impression. He's sort of like the main impression guy on SNL right now, is in the movie.
Okay.
Yeah, if you remember the first club performance that he does with Joan Baez there, he's like the MC that's like, and now we're going to bring on Bob Dylan and everything like that.
That's kind of fun.
It was interesting. But and kind of funny too. So, I like Chalamet's performance. I don't know if it's like that different in execution than a lot of other music biopics performances. It just feels more committed. There's more prep time and everything like that. And obviously, he's a talented performer. He's making the most of this. He's not looking just for he's not chasing the gold, as it were. I think everyone in it is quite good.
Yeah, and a couple of texts before we wrap this up. I think that this movie's cinematography and production design, especially color design, I thought was really quite fantastic. I think that there seems to be a very strong commitment to color palette in this movie, which is a lot of rich browns and tans and golds and grays that really make a coherent color palette, whether we're inside or outside or whatever. I was thinking about this as I was watching, like, these are some really well lit and well color designed sets. And I was thinking, wow, this is so internally coherent, because there's this moment where I think it's when he plays his first folk festival on stage, and there's like, the background is like blue and there's like trees. I'm like, whoa, blue and green, whoa. This movie's supposed to be brown everywhere. And I mean that in a complimentary ways. I think it's very internally coherent and looks very visually pleasing. But I like the work that went into the production design here and the lighting and the cinematography, which is lots of flowing camera movements that I thought really worked to just immerse me in this world, and it felt very gentle and very slow, and I appreciated that quite a bit.
Yeah, no, it's quite well made, and honestly not like overly reverential about Bob, but it obviously is in ways, because the entire film is about how important he was to these genres and how much of a singular artist he is. But it doesn't feel as like idol worshipping as others might. Yeah. Yeah, so I quite enjoyed this thing. I don't know if there's anything else I really have to say, but Boyd Holbrook is good as Johnny Cash.
Oh, he really is. Yeah.
Yeah, which is there's the scene where he's like drunk and coming out of the motel at the end, towards the end of the movie, and he crashes his car into the two other cars, and he's like, you want a bugle?
Dude, my theater lost their minds at that. Joke. That's a really good moment.
And there's a couple, there's laugh lines in this too. This is not just a straight down the line drama. There's some laugh lines here, mostly from like Bob Dylan's, his acidic wit and everything like that. Sure. So yeah, quite good. Tucker, I'm gonna give this one. I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10.
Drum roll, please. There we go. I'm gonna go an 8.5 out of 10. I think this is a really good movie that I think I will actually get a lot more out of as a rewatch. On a rewatch. Mm-hmm. There is high likelihood that we end up reviewing this movie again in a couple of months if it is nominated for Best Picture for our show, The Quest for the Best, is where we review all of the nominees for Best Picture each season. And when I rewatch it, presumably it will be available on a streaming service where I can put on subtitles and understand what he's saying a little bit better. I was thinking about that as I was watching the movie. I'm like, I can't wait to rewatch this and be able to know what he's saying. But I'm excited for that. But I also think that there is, as I said, a lot of interesting thematic material here in what art does to people, what fame does to people, what it means to be an artist, what it means to go your own way and sort of reject the being put in the box
man.
And I think it's interesting. I mean, I think this is a really good movie that I was really pleasantly surprised by. Follows its own tone, gives its own themes, and I can't wait to see it again, which is interesting. But thank you very much, everyone, for watching this. Of course, rewatch this review if you enjoyed it. Or tune in for the Quest review in a couple months, probably. But we will see you guys for more movie reviews in the future.